Welcome to Tales from Sector 9, your portal to immersive sci-fi audio stories. If you enjoy deep space action, rogue AI, and conspiracy theory, you're in the right place. Tap like and subscribe to keep the adventures coming. Drop a comment and tell us where in the galaxy you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and prepare for tonight's story. Legacy of the Starcallers. Aurion IV drifted, a sapphire marble veined with jade continents, nestled within the Outer Veil Nebula's shimmering folds. It was a designated tertiary agri-world, a bureaucratic label that belied its fierce, quiet independence and the secret it guarded. For most of its million inhabitants, life unfolded under the soft, diffused light filtering through the nebula's gases. Cycles of planting genetically tailored lumen wheat, harvesting crystalline energy shards from the planet's shallow mantle, and raising families in settlements carved into mountainsides or nestled in sprawling delta plains. It was deliberately unremarkable, engineered for obscurity. For Revan Solis, Aurion IV was the only home he'd known since the orbital transport accident claimed his xenolinguist parents when he was 6. Now 17, tall and lean with eyes the color of the nebula's deeper voids and perpetually ink-stained fingers, he lived in the tiered city of Ethelberg, perched on the edge of the Great Mesa. His official designation was Simulation Technician Apprentice, a title as mundane as the world itself. But the simulations Revan excelled at were anything but mundane. Housed deep beneath Ethelberg, in shielded chambers humming with power conduits drawing geothermal energy, lay the Oracle Array. It wasn't merely a collection of advanced VR pods. It was a nexus, a distributed remote warfare system of staggering complexity. Revan, along with a handful of other prodigies identified in childhood, spent hours jacked into the array, piloting sleek, phantom starfighters through hyper-realistic combat scenarios. They were the Aegis program, Aurion IV's hidden shield. Their targets, autonomous probes, pirate sorties, and exploratory vessels belonging to expansionist powers, probing the Veil's edges. Threats deemed minor by the distant, preoccupied core worlds, but existential to the isolated colonies. The pilots believed they were honing reflexes in ultra-fidelity games, competing for rankings on digital leaderboards. They were, in truth, Aurion IV's unwitting, first, and only line of defense, their actions sanitized, their targets anonymized, their victories logged as system glitches or navigational hazards by unsuspecting aggressors. Revan was the undisputed ace. His intuition in the sim was preternatural. He flew the Wraith-class interceptor, a design allegedly based on salvaged alien tech, with an artistry that baffled his instructors and fellow pilots. He could feel the ebb and flow of a battle, anticipate vector changes nanoseconds before they occurred, exploit fleeting weaknesses in enemy formations. His call sign, Echo, was whispered with reverence in the sterile halls of the array complex. Outside the simpod, however, he was just Revan, quiet, intensely observant, spending his off hours sketching impossible starship designs in worn notebooks, or debating theoretical warp field geometries with his closest friend, Kale. Kale Vance was Revan's opposite, a whirlwind of nervous energy, technobabble, and grease-stained overalls. An engineering prodigy, Kale maintained the array's delicate systems, often bypassing standard protocols with ingenious, if terrifyingly risky, workarounds. Soraya Vex, with her calm demeanor and steady hands, was training as a medic, her empathy a grounding force for their small group. And then there was Tyron Corda, a stoic orphan like Revan, who excelled in the physical defense training mandated for all colonists, his silence often more potent than words. They were an unlikely constellation of friends, bound by shared youth on a quiet world. The shattering of their reality began not with a klaxon, but with a tremor deep within the planet, followed by a sky bleeding crimson. The nebula's soft glow was ripped apart by harsh, actinic beams lancing down from orbit. Explosions blossomed silently in the thin upper atmosphere, then roared as they struck Ethelberg. The Zerath Dominion had arrived. They were a rumor, a ghost story whispered in the darker corners of the galactic net, a relentlessly expansionist power consuming worlds on the fringe, methodical and utterly ruthless. Somehow, they had pierced Aurion IV's veil of obscurity. The Oracle array pulsed, alarms screaming, defense protocols attempting to activate, but it was too late. Orbital strikes targeted the hidden power conduits, the array chamber buckling under the assault. Chaos erupted. Kyle, already deep underground, grabbed Revan, who was stumbling from a simpod, disoriented by the violent disconnect. They found it, Rev. They found the array. We have to get out. Soraya found them near the emergency access tunnel, her face pale but resolute, medical kit already slung over her shoulder. Tyron appeared moments later, grim-faced, pulling them towards a little-used subterranean transport conduit. This way. Leads to the old landing field, South Ridge. Explosions rocked the tunnels. Above, Ethelberg was succumbing to orbital bombardment and ground troop landings. Zerath dropships, sharp-angled and obsidian black, disgorged armored soldiers who moved with terrifying efficiency. The Planetary Defense Force, equipped for little more than policing actions, was being systematically annihilated. The Aegis program, designed for remote skirmishes, was useless against a full-scale invasion. They burst onto the surface into acrid smoke and the shriek of tearing metal. The old landing field was deserted except for one structure, a colossal, derelict ship half buried in the red dust, resembling a forgotten monument more than a vessel. It was ancient, its hull scarred and pitted, its design unlike anything known in current databases, vast, angular, yet possessing a strange, organic grace. Locals called it the Stargale, a relic from a mythical past, dismissed as inert salvage. Kale, can you... Revan began. Already working on it. Kale was sprinting towards a maintenance panel near the immense landing gear, tools flying from his kit. Sparks showered as he bypassed centuries of disuse. A low hum vibrated through the ground. Lights flickered deep within the Stargale's viewport slits. A Zerath skimmer screamed overhead, plasma bolts stitching the ground near them. Tyron shoved them towards the opening boarding ramp, which was lowering with agonizing slowness. He raised a salvaged pulse rifle, laying down surprisingly accurate covering fire. Soraya pulled a wounded Revan, grazed by debris, aboard. Kyle scrambled up last, hitting a sequence on the external panel before leaping onto the ramp as it retracted. With a groan that echoed through its ancient frame, the Stargale lifted. Dust billowed, engines whining with a sound unlike any modern drive system. It ascended slowly, clumsily, a leviathan waking from an eon's slumber. Below, Aurion IV burned. Zerath fighters swarmed towards them. Inside the cavernous, dimly lit bridge, strange consoles flickered to life around them. Kale wrestled with unfamiliar controls. Power is minimal, systems are archaic, but the core drive is... Wow. Revan strapped himself into the pilot's seat. It felt right. Alien, yet intimately familiar, like the Wraith simulator, but infinitely more real. His hands moved instinctively, coaxing the colossal ship into a lumbering evasion as plasma fire sizzled past the main viewport. "We need to jump," Soraya yelled, pointing at a tactical display showing converging Zerath cruisers. "Working on it. This nav computer is different," Kyle muttered, tracing glowing lines on a crystalline interface. Suddenly the central console flared, projecting a three-dimensional hologram into the bridge's center. It wasn't a standard star chart. It was a complex, multi-layered matrix of star clusters, nebulae, and swirling energy signatures, interconnected by shimmering pathways. At its core, a designation pulsed softly: Federation Archives, Sector, Starcaller Prime. Below them, Aurion IV was being silenced. Above, the Zerath closed in. Ahead, the holographic map pulsed, a silent invitation to a forgotten past, a desperate gamble for a future. Revan gripped the controls, the Stargale responding sluggishly but surely. Their home was lost. Their secret was out. All they had was this ancient vessel and a map to a legend. The legend of the Starcallers, humanity's supposed ancestors, lost to time and myth. It was their only hope. The jump was jarring, less a seamless transition through hyperspace, and more like being violently shoved through crumpled reality. The Stargale shuddered, groaning like stressed metal, before settling into the eerie calm of FTL travel. The swirling vortex outside the main viewport stabilized into streaks of distorted starlight. On the bridge, the young crew exchanged wide-eyed glances, the adrenaline of escape slowly giving way to the crushing weight of their situation. Aurion IV was gone, consumed by the Zerath Dominion. They were fugitives aboard a derelict Enigma, pursued by a relentless foe. "Status?" Revan asked, his voice hoarse. His hands still tingled with the unfamiliar resonance of the Stargale's controls. Kyle, hunched over a console spewing diagnostics in an archaic script, ran a hand through his already messy hair. Core drive stable, surprisingly efficient for its age. Hull integrity, mostly holding. Life support functional, barely. Weapons systems, offline. Defensive systems, minimal energy shielding, seems damaged or depleted. We're running on fumes and archaeological wonders. Soraya was tending to Revan's arm, her touch gentle but firm. "Minor plasma score. You'll live. We have basic medbay facilities, but supplies are limited and likely expired." Tyron stood near the viewport, scanning the distorted star lines, his posture rigid, scanning the void as if expecting an attack even in jump space. Their initial trajectory, plotted hastily by Kyle from the Starcaller map's periphery, aimed for a region marked as Refugee Corridor Sigma, a supposedly neutral zone dotted with independent stations and asteroid mining colonies. But the Zerath were already anticipating them. Days blurred into a tense cycle of short jumps, navigating treacherous pockets of real space to avoid detection. They skirted the decaying grandeur of a Dyson swarm remnant, its solar collectors fractured and dark, a graveyard of ambition. They plunged through the Serpent's Tooth Nebula, a crackling labyrinth of ionized gas and gravitational anomalies that played havoc with sensors. Zerath long-range probes occasionally ghosting at the edge of their detection radius before vanishing back into the stellar haze. During these tense passages, Revan began his real training. The Stargale, despite its size, was surprisingly responsive, almost anticipating his intentions. The interface was unlike anything he'd used. Less button presses and joystick waggles, more intuitive, almost biofeedback driven. He spent hours familiarizing himself, running diagnostics Kale translated, pushing the ancient ship through simulated evasive maneuvers within the ship's own limited holographic systems. The muscle memory from the Oracle array was there, but the stakes were terrifyingly real. A missed vector wasn't a lower score, it was oblivion. He realized with dawning horror and awe that the simulations hadn't just been training. They had been conditioning, tuning his mind to resonate with a technology far older and stranger than Aurion IV's engineers had ever admitted. Their supplies dwindled. The Stargale's recyclers were ancient and inefficient. Water discipline became strict. Nutrient paste rations were meager. Hope felt as thin as the recycled air. The Starcaller map remained their only guide, its intricate pathways suggesting routes the Zerath might not anticipate, hinting at hidden conduits and gravity wells. Kale worked tirelessly, coaxing reluctant systems online, patching hull breaches with salvaged plating from non-essential compartments, his usual manic energy focused into a sharp point of desperate ingenuity. Soraya monitored their dwindling resources and maintained morale with quiet strength, while Tyron established rudimentary security watches and drilled them in emergency procedures. Their best chance for resupply and information lay at Kestrel 9, an infamous free station built into a cluster of hollowed-out asteroids on the edge of the Sigma Corridor. Known as a haven for smugglers, mercenaries, information brokers, and those generally wishing to avoid Imperial entanglements, it was dangerous but potentially invaluable. Docking the Stargale, even under cloaking protocols Kale jury-rigged, was risky. The ship was too large, too strange. They opted to take a small, barely functional shuttle salvaged from the Stargale's cavernous hangar bay. Kestrel 9 was a sensory overload, a chaotic symphony of clanging metal, overlapping languages, holographic advertisements flickering in a dozen scripts, the smell of ozone, exotic spices, and unwashed bodies. Docking clamps groaned, ships of every conceivable design jostled for space, and the station's inhabitants eyed newcomers with suspicion. Revan, Kyle, Soraya, and Tyron, clad in scavenged, nondescript clothing, moved through the throng, trying to appear inconspicuous. Their goal was information, and potentially an ally. The Starcaller map hinted at individuals or groups who might still hold knowledge of the Federation. Kale's slicing into Kestrel 9's local network, a risky move shielded by layers of decoys, pointed them towards a notorious figure, Dren O'Connor. The name resonated with Revan. O'Connor was a footnote in obscure military histories, a highly decorated pilot from the old Republic days, supposedly linked to early Starcaller research projects before a spectacular fall from grace, involving accusations of treason and dereliction of duty. He'd vanished decades ago. Finding him here felt like grasping at myths. They found him in a dingy corner of a bar called The Void, nursing a glass of amber liquid that smelled vaguely corrosive. He looked older than his file suggested, his face a roadmap of cynicism and regret, but his eyes still held a sharp, assessing glint. He didn't look surprised to see them. "Let me guess," O'Connor rasped, not looking up. Young hopefuls, running from something big, stumbled across something old, looking for answers the galaxy doesn't want found. Am I warm? Revan stepped forward. We found a ship, the Stargale. It has a map dash. O'Connor choked on his drink, his eyes snapping up, suddenly alert. The Stargale? Impossible. It was a legend, a ghost story. He studied Revan intently. Who are you, kid? Revan Solis. My friends Kyle, Soraya, Tyron. Our home, Aurion IV, was destroyed by the Zerath Dominion. They're hunting us. O'Connor leaned back, skepticism warring with something else, a flicker of long-buried belief. The Zerath, figures, they always sniffed around the edges of Starcaller space. What do you want from me? Absolution? Ancient secrets? I'm just an old man drinking himself into the void. Guidance, Soraya said softly. The map points towards Starcaller Prime, but the route is fragmented, dangerous. You flew these routes, didn't you? Before... O'Connor flinched. Before I made choices. Choices that cost lives. He fell silent, staring into his glass. Then, abruptly, alarms blared throughout Kestrel 9. Red emergency lights bathed the station in pulses of crimson. Shouts echoed from the main concourse. Damn it! O'Connor slammed his glass down. They found you. Or me. Doesn't matter. Zerath operatives. They don't do subtle. Gunfire erupted outside the bar. Patrons scrambled for cover. O'Connor kicked back his chair, pulling a heavy, well-worn blaster pistol from beneath his coat. Stick with me if you want to live. They'll have blockaded the main docking bays. There's another way. He led them through a maze of service corridors and ventilation shafts, moving with surprising agility. Zerath soldiers, clad in sleek black armor, appeared at intersections, plasma bolts searing the air. Tyron moved like a shadow, providing cover fire, his movements economical and deadly. Kale used his Omni-tool to overload door mechanisms, creating diversions. Soraya dragged a wounded bystander into relative safety before rejoining them. Revan, caught in his first real firefight, felt a strange calm descend, his mind processing angles and threats almost like the simulator, but the smell of ozone and fear was nauseatingly real. They reached a secondary hangar, smaller and filled with dilapidated courier ships. O'Connor hotwired an old, beat-up freighter. This junk heap won't outrun them for long, but it'll get us off this rock. As they blasted off from Kestrel 9, explosions rocked the station behind them. Zerath cruisers were already moving into position, establishing a blockade. Their escape was frantic, a desperate weave through station debris and panicked civilian traffic. O'Connor piloted with a grim familiarity, pushing the freighter to its absolute limit. They know about the Stargale now, O'Connor said, his eyes fixed on the swirling hyperspace transition. And they know we're heading into Starcaller territory. The real chase has just begun. He glanced at Revan, a grudging respect in his eyes. You kids didn't just stumble onto a ship. You woke up history, and history bites back. The escape from Kestrel 9 left them shaken, but resolute. Dren O'Connor, cynical survivor turned reluctant guide, proved invaluable. His knowledge of forgotten hyperspace routes, smuggler caches, and the political intricacies of the galactic fringe kept them one step ahead of the relentless Zerath pursuit, which had intensified now that their quarry was confirmed to possess Starcaller artifacts. O'Connor piloted the battered freighter with seasoned skill, but it was clear the vessel was no match for Zerath military hardware in a straight fight. Their true hope remained docked invisibly in a nearby asteroid cluster, the Stargale. After a tense rendezvous, they transferred back to the ancient ship, abandoning the freighter as a decoy rigged to self-destruct after a short, misleading hyperspace jump. Back within the Stargale's strange, resonant interior, a new urgency settled upon them. O'Connor, despite his initial reluctance, seemed galvanized by the ship itself, walking its vast corridors with a mixture of awe and apprehension. I heard stories, O'Connor murmured, running a hand over a cool, seamless bulkhead. Fleet Command whispered about Pathfinder ships during the Outer Rim conflicts. Vessels that didn't just travel through space, but conversed with it. Ships that could anticipate, adapt. They were deemed unstable, unpredictable. Most were lost or decommissioned. I thought the Stargale was just another space myth. Kyle, meanwhile, was practically vibrating with excitement, delving deeper into the Stargale's systems, with O'Connor occasionally peering over his shoulder, offering cryptic advice based on half-remembered technical briefings from decades past. "The power conduits," Cale exclaimed, pointing at a complex holographic schematic he'd managed to coax from a secondary console. "They're not just carrying energy, they're resonating. It's like the entire ship is a tuning fork, Drin. And look at this. Shielded compartments, deep within the engineering section. Power signatures unlike anything I've ever seen." Following the schematics led them to a series of heavily shielded chambers deep within the Stargale's heart. Access required navigating security protocols that seemed almost biological in their complexity, responding to specific energy frequencies, and strangely, to Revan's proximity. It was as if the ship recognized something in him, an echo of the pilots it was built for. Inside, they found not dusty relics, but technology that seemed simultaneously ancient and light years ahead of current science. The first chamber housed rows upon rows of dormant, fist-sized drones, shaped like multifaceted crystals. Cale scanned one gingerly. Incredible energy signatures, miniature cold fusion cores, and networked, they seemed designed to operate as a swarm. In the second chamber, they found the source of the ship's elusive defensive systems, emitter arrays linked to the hull, designed to project phased energy fields that could potentially absorb or deflect incoming fire, powered by tapping directly into the ship's resonant core. It was damaged, components misaligned, energy capacitors depleted. "This is Starcaller tech," O'Connor breathed, his usual cynicism replaced by reverence. "Defensive screens that phase shift, drone swarms controlled by direct neural interface. This is beyond anything the Republic ever managed to reverse engineer." The challenge was activating and controlling it. The systems were designed for Starcaller pilots, whose neural architecture, legend claimed, was different, more attuned to the universe's fundamental energies. Kyle could interface with the systems, painstakingly translating code and rerouting power, but direct control was elusive. Until Revan approached the primary drone control node. The console flickered, strange symbols swirling across its surface, before resolving into a complex, three-dimensional tactical display. When Revan placed his hands on the cool, crystalline interface points, he felt a jolt, not of electricity, but of information, a flood of data pouring directly into his mind. Drone statuses, energy levels, tactical overlays. It felt like the Oracle array, amplified 1,000-fold. The Wraith simulator hadn't just been mimicking Starcaller tech. It had been subtly preparing him to interface with it. Their first test came sooner than expected. A Zerath hunter detachment, fast frigates and heavy fighters, ambushed them as they exited a jump near a binary pulsar system. Alarms blared. "Shields are minimal, weapons offline," Cale yelled, fighting the alien controls. "They're launching fighters," Tyron reported, tracking the incoming swarm on tactical. "Revan," O'Connor said, his voice tight. "Those drones, can you wake them up?" Revan closed his eyes, focusing, reaching out with his mind through the interface. He felt the drones stir, their crystalline structures resonating. On the tactical display, dozens of new friendly icons flared to life. He visualized deployment patterns, defensive formations learned in the simulator, but adapted to the Stargale's bulk. With a surge of mental command, he pushed. From hidden launch ports across the Stargale's hull, the crystal drones deployed, shimmering into existence like angry hornets. They moved with impossible speed and coordination, forming intricate defensive lattices, intercepting plasma bolts with bursts of sacrificial energy, and darting through the Zerath fighter formations, targeting engines and weapon systems with pinpoint precision lances of energy. The Zerath pilots, accustomed to predictable dogfights, were thrown into chaos by the swarm's fluid, unpredictable tactics. While Revan orchestrated the drone defense, Kale and O'Connor worked frantically on the shield emitters. Following O'Connor's memory fragments and Kale's diagnostic readings, they managed to partially activate the phasing shield. It flickered erratically, absorbing several direct hits from the Zerath frigates before overloading. "Shields down," Kale shouted. "Drones can't hold them off forever," Soraya added, monitoring hull integrity. Revan scanned the battlefield, his mind racing. The Zerath frigates were moving to flank them, boxing them in against the pulsar's gravitational distortions. He needed an escape route. His eyes fell on the pulsar itself, its intense magnetic fields warping space-time. An idea sparked, reckless but potentially brilliant. "Kale, can you plot a micro-jump through the pulsar's corona?" Kale stared at him. "Are you insane? The gravimetric shear would tear us apart. The radiation—" "Not if we use the phasing shield," Revan countered. "Just a burst, timed with the jump initiation. Use the drones to clear a path through the ejected plasma." O'Connor looked from Revan to the tactical display, then back again. A slow grin spread across his face. The kid's either suicidal or a genius. Do it. While Kale frantically calculated the impossible jump sequence, Revan commanded the drone swarm, sacrificing dozens to carve a channel through the pulsar's boiling corona. Tyron rerouted auxiliary power to the shield emitters. Soraya prepped medical supplies, bracing for impact. "Shield emitters charged for a 0.03-second burst," Kale yelled. "Jump calculated. Engaging. Now!" Revan felt the command lock in. The Stargale plunged towards the binary stars. The drone swarm formed a desperate, incandescent spearhead. Just as they hit the corona's edge, the phasing shield flared, bathing the ship in an ethereal glow. Simultaneously, the jump drive engaged. For a fraction of a second, they existed inside the star, protected by a bubble of Starcaller physics. Then, reality twisted violently, and they were flung back into jump space, alarms screaming, the ship shuddering violently. Behind them, the Zerath Hunter detachment, caught off guard by the maneuver, was left staring at the raging pulsar. Silence fell on the bridge, broken only by the pinging of cooling systems and their ragged breaths. "Report," Revan managed, releasing the drone control interface, feeling mentally drained but exhilarated. "Hull integrity holding at 60%, Soraya reported after a tense moment. "Minor injuries, mostly bumps and bruises. We're alive." Kale slumped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Drive stable, shield emitters fried, but repairable. Drones. We lost about 30% of the swarm." O'Connor let out a long breath. "Starcaller tactics, using the environment, unpredictable jumps. I haven't seen flying like that since a long time ago." He looked at Revan, no longer seeing just a kid. You didn't just learn to fly in that simulator, did you? You learned to think like them. Revan met his gaze. The Oracle Array, the Stargale, the drones, it was all connected. He wasn't just piloting a ship, he was interfacing with a legacy. And that legacy was fighting back. The Zerath were hunting them, but now they had claws. The desperate gamble at the binary pulsar bought them time. The Zerath, momentarily thrown off balance by the Stargale's unexpected capabilities and Revan's audacious tactics, seemed to regroup, their pursuit becoming more calculated, less frantic. This respite allowed the Stargale's crew, guided by O'Connor and the increasingly detailed projections of the Starcaller map, to navigate a series of ancient, hidden hyperspace conduits, routes unknown to modern galactic charts, bypassing major Zerath patrols. Their destination, according to the map's convergence point and O'Connor's fragmented knowledge, was Ascendia, designated Sanctuary Primus in Starcaller script. Not their homeworld, the map suggested, but a nexus, a meeting place, a world deliberately shielded and hidden deep within a nebula that mimicked subspace interference. Legend called it a haven, built during the twilight of the Starcaller Federation as a repository of knowledge and a potential seed for future rebirth. Whether anyone or anything remained was unknown. Emerging from the final hidden conduit was like passing through a veil. The turbulent nebula resolved, revealing a breathtaking solar system. Ascendia wasn't a single planet, but a complex network of orbital habitats, crystalline structures woven into the fabric of space, orbiting a serene, Earth-like world bathed in the light of a stable yellow star. Docking platforms extended like welcoming arms, energy signatures pulsed with calm regularity, and small, unfamiliar ships moved between the habitats on lanes of coherent light. It was not deserted. Hesitantly, using archaic Starcaller communication protocols deciphered by Kyle, they hailed the system. The response was cautious, encoded, but undeniably intelligent. After transmitting identifying data from the Stargale, a ship clearly recognized by Ascendia's automated systems, they were granted docking clearance at the primary habitat, a colossal structure designated Ethelgard Spire. As the Stargale settled into a docking cradle designed for vessels of its scale, they saw who awaited them. Not Starcallers in the flesh. Their ancient lineage seemed truly lost to time. But descendants, inheritors, refugees, representatives from a dozen different species and cultures, beings displaced by Zerath expansionism or other galactic conflicts, who had followed whispers and fragments of lore to this hidden sanctuary over centuries. There were the insectoid Cathar weavers from the fallen Cygnus colonies, the crystalline silicates of the shattered Ophiuchus Combine, methane-breathing scholars from Gliesa 581G, even a splinter group of humans from colonies long thought lost during the Neogenic Wars. Ascendia was a mosaic of the dispossessed, clinging to the remnants of Starcaller technology and ideals, living under a pact of mutual survival, but lacking unity and direction. Their arrival in the Stargale, a near-mythical vessel, sent ripples of shock and excitement through Ascendia's diverse populace. They were met by a council of elders, representing the major factions within the sanctuary. The initial meetings were fraught with tension. Some saw the newcomers, particularly the humans linked to the ship's command signature, Revan, as fulfilling ancient prophecies. Others viewed them with suspicion, fearing they had led the Zerath directly to the sanctuary's doorstep, a fear that felt chillingly plausible. Revan, thrust into the role of spokesperson by virtue of his connection to the Stargale, found himself navigating complex political currents. He spoke not of prophecy, but of shared threat. He recounted the fall of Aurion IV, the relentless pursuit, the evidence that the Zerath were actively hunting Starcaller legacies. He demonstrated the Stargale's capabilities, the drone swarm, the phasing shield concepts, not as weapons of conquest, but as tools for survival. O'Connor, surprisingly, proved a gruff but effective diplomat, leveraging his old Republic contacts, or notoriety, and his understanding of military strategy to communicate the severity of the Zerath threat. Kale shared technical data, demonstrating how Starcaller principles could be adapted to bolster Ascendia's existing, though aged, defense systems. Soraya spoke of the humanitarian cost of the Zerath advance, connecting with the refugees on a personal level. Tyron, observing the council sessions, identified potential security weaknesses in Ascendia's protocols, his quiet warnings carrying unexpected weight. Slowly, hesitantly, a fragile alliance began to form. The sheer fact of the Stargale's arrival, coupled with Revan's evident piloting skill, broadcast simulations of his pulsar escape were met with stunned silence, and his earnest plea for unity against a common enemy began to sway the council. He wasn't a messiah, he was a catalyst. He spoke of pooling resources, sharing knowledge, adapting Starcaller tech not just for defense, but for communication and mutual support. He inspired not through divine mandate, but through competence, courage, and a desperate shared need to survive. The Cathar offered their expertise in energy weaving for shield reinforcement. The Silicates provided raw materials and advanced computation. Others pledged ships, pilots, engineers, soldiers. Ascendia, a collection of disparate survivors, began to tentatively coalesce into a unified force. Revan trained pilots from different species in the Stargale's simulators, adapting Starcaller swarm tactics to their unique physiologies and ship types. Kale and Ascendian engineers worked feverishly, integrating the Stargale's systems with the habitat's defenses, creating a network of drone controllers and shield modulators. O'Connor, drawing on his decades of experience, formulated a defense strategy, identifying choke points, ambush zones, and fallback positions within the complex orbital structure of the Ascendia system. Soraya organized medical teams, preparing for inevitable casualties. Tyron oversaw the fortification of key sectors within Ethelgard's spire. Their preparations were spurred by a growing dread. Long-range sensors, boosted by Starcaller technology integrated by Kyle, began detecting faint, stealthy energy signatures at the nebula's edge. Zerath scout probes, hunting for the source of the Stargale's energy trail. They had found them. The tentative peace of Ascendia was shattered. The alliance, barely formed, faced its first and potentially final test. Word spread through the habitats. The Dominion was coming. Fear mingled with resolve. They had found sanctuary, but now they would have to fight for it. Revan stood on the Stargale's bridge, looking out at the assembled fleet. A motley collection of Ascendian defense ships, retrofitted freighters, and fighter craft from half a dozen species, now networked and awaiting his command. Kale monitored the strengthening Zerath signatures. Soraya checked medical readiness statuses flashing on a side console. Tyron stood by tactical, coordinating ground defense units within the spire. O'Connor stood beside Revan, a hand resting on the tactical plotter. "They're massing just outside the nebula," O'Connor reported grimly. Fleet composition suggests a primary assault force. Cruisers, heavy destroyers, multiple fighter wings, led by the Harbinger command carrier, Aurion IV's flagship. The name sent a chill through Revan. Commander Aurion IV, the architect of the Aurion IV invasion, the face of the Zerath Dominion's ruthless expansion. "Let them come," Revan said, his voice steady, amplified across the Allied fleet's comm network. "Ascendia welcomed us when we had nowhere else to go. We found more than just a refuge here. We found allies. We found purpose. The Starcallers built this place as a bastion of hope. Today, we honor that legacy. We fight for our future together." The gathered ships of Ascendia held their positions, a fragile shield against the coming storm. The Zerath fleet began to emerge from the nebula's obscuring clouds, a phalanx of dark, menacing warships against the serene backdrop of the sanctuary. The battle for Ascendia, and perhaps for the future of the Starcaller legacy, was about to begin. The Zerath fleet emerged from the swirling nebula not as a hesitant probe, but as an overwhelming tide of angular obsidian warships. The Harbinger, Commander Aurion IV's flagship, took center stage, a vessel easily 3 times the size of the Stargale, bristling with heavy plasma cannons and launch bays disgorging swarms of sleek, predatory fighters. Smaller cruisers and destroyers fanned out, forming an inescapable crescent aimed at the heart of Ascendia, Ethelgard's spire. Their message was clear: surrender or annihilation. On the Stargale's bridge, the tension was palpable. Revan stood at the command interface, the Starcaller drone network humming under his mental touch, Allied ship positions overlaid on the tactical display. O'Connor stood beside him, coordinating fleet movements. "Hold positions," Revan commanded, his voice echoing across the Allied comms. "Let them commit. Kyle, prepare shield harmonics, pattern delta. Tyron, ground forces ready?" "Shields cycling to frequency," Kyle confirmed, fingers flying across his console. "Ascendian power grid is stable, feeding the orbital emitters." "Spire defense teams in position," Tyron's voice came back, calm and clipped. "Holding fire until they breach the outer perimeter." The first wave of Zerath fighters screamed towards the Allied lines. Revan unleashed the combined drone swarm, the Stargale's crystals augmented by Ascendian defense drones, meeting the attackers in a dazzling, chaotic melee halfway between the fleets. Lances of energy crisscrossed the void, explosions blossoming like deadly flowers. Simultaneously, the Zerath cruisers opened fire, heavy plasma bolts streaking towards the orbital habitats. "Shields up," O'Connor ordered. Ascendia's newly integrated defense grid flared to life. Starcaller tech-inspired phasing shields shimmered around Ethelgard's spire and the adjacent habitats, absorbing the initial barrage. The energy drain was immense, Kale frantically rerouting power, but they held. "Their shields are stronger than anticipated," Yoder's voice, cold and precise, echoed on an intercepted Zerath channel. "Concentrate fire on the emitter nodes. Deploy breaching pods against the primary habitat." The battle became a brutal, 3-dimensional chess match. Revan directed the drone swarms with fluid precision, anticipating Zerath fighter formations, sacrificing drones strategically to protect key Ascendian ships, exploiting momentary weaknesses. His time in the Oracle Array, honed by the desperate flight across the galaxy, allowed him to process the maelstrom of data with uncanny speed. O'Connor, meanwhile, commanded the Allied ships, executing hit-and-run attacks, drawing Zerath cruisers into pre-planned crossfire zones near gravitational anomalies created by Ascendia's orbital architecture. Cathar Weavers piloted nimble interceptors, their organic ships dancing through plasma fire, while silicate vessels absorbed heavy damage, their crystalline structures refracting energy. Despite their ingenuity and courage, the sheer weight of the Zerath numbers began to tell. Shields flickered and failed on outlying habitats. Ascendian ships, valiant but outmatched, were systematically targeted and destroyed. Breaching pods slammed into Ethelgard's spire, disgorging elite Zerath shock troops. Tyron's voice became tighter as he directed the desperate defense within the spire's corridors. Soraya's medical channels were flooded with casualty reports. "Revan, we can't hold them indefinitely," O'Connor said grimly, watching a flanking group of Zerath destroyers punch through their screen. "Yoder's focusing everything on the spire and the Stargale. He wants the ship and whatever secrets it holds." Revan looked at the Harbinger, looming at the center of the Zerath formation, coordinating the assault. Taking out Yoder wouldn't necessarily stop the fleet, but it would cripple its command structure, sow chaos, and perhaps force a retreat. It was a desperate move, bordering on suicidal. "Kale," Revan said, his decision made. "Can you give me a focused burst from the phasing shield? Just the bow section? Enough for one pass?" Kale's eyes widened. "Through their main batteries? It's suicide, Rev." "It's our only chance. Soraya, Tyron, O'Connor, coordinate the defense here. Buy me time." Revan's hands tightened on the Stargale's controls. "I'm taking the fight to Yoder." "Revan, no!" Soraya cried out. "He's right," O'Connor said, his face grim but resolute. "It's a Starcaller move. Create chaos. Disrupt the head of the snake. Go, Revan. We'll hold the line." Revan nodded, pouring his focus into the ship. He directed the remaining drones in a feint towards the Harbinger's port side, drawing fighter cover away. Kale rerouted all available power to the forward shield emitter. "Forward phase shield charged for 0.8 seconds, Kyle shouted. "Good luck, Rev." Revan pushed the Stargale's ancient engines to their limit, accelerating directly towards the Harbinger through a hail of defensive fire. Plasma bolts splashed harmlessly against the momentary flicker of the phasing shield as he activated it, plunging into the optimal firing range of the Zerath flagship's main cannons. For a heart-stopping moment, the Stargale flew directly through incandescent energy beams, protected by physics-defying Starcaller ingenuity. Then the shield collapsed, alarms screaming. The Stargale shuddered under glancing hits, but Revan was already through the gauntlet, now too close for the Harbinger's main guns to track effectively. He targeted the flagship's bridge section, unleashing the Stargale's own rarely used energy-intensive forward particle projectors, another Starcaller system Kale had barely managed to bring online. Beams of intense energy slammed into the Harbinger's bridge superstructure. Explosions ripped across the command tower. On the Stargale's bridge, they saw secondary explosions ripple along the flagship's spine. Aboard the crippled Harbinger, Commander Eric Yoder stared in disbelief as his command center disintegrated around him. His last sight was the ancient, defiant form of the Stargale filling his viewport. The destruction of the Zerath command center sent shockwaves through their fleet. Orders ceased. Formations faltered. Seeing their chance, the remaining Ascendian defenders, rallied by O'Connor, pressed their advantage. Cathar fighters harried the confused Zerath cruisers. Tyron's ground teams successfully repelled the boarders from Ethelgard's spire as Zerath morale plummeted. Leaderless and facing unexpectedly fierce resistance, the Zerath fleet began a ragged, disorganized retreat back into the nebula, leaving behind shattered ships and the burning wreck of the Harbinger. Silence, heavy and profound, fell over the Ascendia system, broken only by the crackle of comms coordinating rescue and repair efforts. They had held. Against overwhelming odds, the sanctuary had survived. On the Stargale's bridge, the crew slumped in exhaustion and relief. Revan leaned back, the mental strain of controlling the drones and the ship through the final assault, leaving him drained. "They're retreating," Soraya whispered, disbelief in her voice. Kale let out a whoop of exhausted triumph. "We did it. Holy scrap, we actually did it." O'Connor clapped Revan on the shoulder, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "That was piloting, kid. That was pure Starcaller." Tyron's voice came over the comm, still calm but with an undercurrent of relief. "Spire is secure. Borders neutralized." Ascendia was saved, but the cost had been heavy. Yet, from the debris and loss, something new was forged. A true alliance, hardened by fire, united by the shared victory. In the aftermath, Ascendia became a hub of rebuilding and renewed purpose. The disparate refugees, now bound by shared sacrifice, formally established a new council, dedicated not just to survival, but to actively resisting Zerath expansion and rediscovering the lost network of Starcaller worlds hinted at in the Stargale's archives. Revan Solis, no longer just an orphan pilot from a forgotten colony, stood as a symbol of this resurgent hope. He, Kale, Soraya, Tyron, and even the cynical Dren O'Connor were hailed as heroes, the crew of the legendary Stargale. But Revan knew their victory at Ascendia was just one battle in a much larger conflict. The Zerath Dominion, though dealt a blow, remained a powerful force in the galaxy, and the secrets of the Starcallers were still largely unknown. Standing once again on the bridge of the Stargale, fully repaired and humming with ancient power, Revan looked out at the star field displayed on the main viewport. Beside him stood his friends, Kyle, already tinkering with upgrades, Soraya, coordinating relief efforts, Tyron, overseeing the ship's renewed security, and O'Connor, poring over the Starcaller map, a new light in his old eyes. Their mission was clear: take the Stargale back out into the galaxy, seek out other hidden sanctuaries, rally more allies, and carry the fight to the Dominion. They would be the vanguard of the rekindled Starcaller legacy, champions for the lost and the oppressed. Ascendia was safe for now, a beacon of defiance, but the true journey to reclaim freedom for the galaxy, guided by the whispers of the ancients and the courage forged in adversity, had only just begun. The Stargale turned towards the endless possibilities of the void, its engines singing a song of ages, carrying the hope of a new dawn into the waiting darkness. The air in California's High Sierra Nevada, July 2025, possessed a clarity that scraped the lungs clean. Alex Thompson breathed it in like a man reclaiming a birthright. Each step on the Pacific Crest Trail crunching decomposed granite under his Salomon boots, a rhythm section to the symphony of wind through ancient pines, and the distant scream of a hawk mapping thermals. He was 3 weeks out. The initial ache subsided into hardened muscle memory, the digital noise of his former life fading into the analog hum of the wilderness. His pack, a marvel of ultralight engineering, felt less like a burden and more like a carapace, containing the distilled essentials of survival in this vertical world. Tent, sleeping system, water filter, freeze-dried sustenance calculated to the calorie. and nested securely in a padded pouch, the Trinity, his iPhone 16 Pro, its ceramic shield gleaming dully, a foldable high-efficiency photovoltaic panel, his umbilical to the energy grid of the sun, and the small, potent miracle of the private LLM application. He'd installed it partly as a tech nerd indulgence, partly as a just-in-case. Downloading the compact but powerful Llama 3.2, Gemma 2, and Quen 2.5 models had felt like loading encyclopedias onto a device designed for ephemeral tweets. A safety net of knowledge, offline, sovereign. He'd queried Llama about local flora identification, used Quen to calculate remaining water needs against elevation gain, even asked Gemma for optimal campsite selection based on predicted wind patterns, minor conveniences on a well-trodden path. He was Alex Thompson, late 20s, competent, perhaps running from the low-static hum of existential dread that permeated his generation's hyper-connected world, seeking something tangible in the immense indifference of the mountains. That afternoon, the indifference curdled. The sky, a canvas of serene cerulean, began to bruise along the western horizon. Clouds gathered with unnatural speed, not the puffy, aimless cumulus of summer, but dense, muscular thunderheads coalescing like a fist. The air grew heavy, charged, the light taking on a sickly yellow hue. Alex checked his phone, not for signal, useless here, but for the barometer app integrated with the iPhone's sensors. The pressure was plummeting. His weather app, last updated at dawn via a fleeting satellite link, had predicted afternoon showers, not this meteorological apocalypse brewing. Dinner time approached, the planned campsite still miles away over a high, exposed ridge. Prudence screamed louder than the rising wind. He veered off the faint trail, seeking shelter on the leeward side of a granite buttress, a cluster of stunted, lightning-scarred pines offering meager psychological comfort. The storm broke not with rain, but with violence. Wind hit like a physical blow, tearing at the pines, whipping needles into his face. Then the electrical display began, and it was unlike anything Alex had witnessed. Not distant flashes, but intimate, terrifying strokes of raw power, etching the landscape in blinding negative, the thunder instantaneous, a physical concussion that vibrated through the rock beneath him. Close. Too close. The ozone tang was thick, acrid. He felt the distinctive prickle crawling up his arms, the hairs lifting. He flattened himself against the granite, pulling his pack over his head, the synthetic fabric offering no real protection, but fulfilling a primal urge to hide. A deafening crack exploded nearby, the light searing through his eyelids. He felt a bizarre, full-body thrum, a vibration deep in his bones, accompanied by a smell like burnt wiring and hot rock. Then, only the roar of the wind and the relentless drumming of rain that finally began, thick and cold. He huddled, shivering, the storm raging for what felt like an eternity, eventually succumbing to an uneasy, adrenaline-laced doze. He awoke stiff, cold, but alive. The rain had stopped. A weak, watery sunlight filtered through the bruised clouds. He sat up, scanning the surroundings. Wrong. Everything was subtly, fundamentally wrong. The familiar shape of the granite buttress seemed altered. The pines looked different, younger, or perhaps a different species altogether. More disturbingly, the faint indentation of the PCT, his lifeline through this wilderness, was simply gone, vanished. He scrambled up, heart hammering against his ribs. He pulled out his phone, powered on, thankfully. He opened the mapping app, the little blue dot that was him pulsing mockingly, in a sea of undifferentiated green topographic lines. No trail overlay, no satellite connection available. He tried the compass app. It spun erratically for a moment, then settled, but the orientation felt skewed relative to the sun's position. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at him. He forced it down, reverting to training. Sun position, terrain features, general direction. He knew roughly which way the trail should have run. He started walking, pushing through unfamiliar undergrowth, the silence profound, lacking even the distant hum of aircraft that usually threaded the background noise of the 21st century. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. His water filter clogged more quickly than usual with unfamiliar sediment. The plants looked subtly alien, the insects louder, more aggressive. Doubt gnawed at him. Had the lightning strike addled his brain? Was he delirious? Then he heard it, the rhythmic thunk of metal on rock, the splash of water, rough voices carrying on the still air. Hope surged, quickly followed by confusion. He crested a small rise, peering through dense manzanita. Below, a muddy creek had been diverted into a series of rickety wooden sluice boxes. Men, clad in rough-spun trousers, stained shirts, and wide-brimmed hats, worked with shovels and pans. Their movements were economical, hard-bitten. A few mules stood tethered nearby, laden with supplies. It looked like a historical reenactment, crude and inefficient. But the sweat staining their backs, the grim set of their jaws, the sheer weariness etched into their faces. This was no performance. This was toil. This was survival. And there wasn't a scrap of Gore-Tex, a glint of modern alloy, or the whine of a single engine anywhere in sight. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. The mining operation, the clothes, the tools. They screamed a single, impossible word. Past. He ducked down, his breath catching in his throat. The lightning hadn't just thrown him off the trail. It had thrown him off the century. The immediate imperative was invisibility. Alex retreated from the rise, moving with the ingrained stealth of a hiker avoiding spooking wildlife, though the stakes now felt infinitely higher. The men below weren't actors. They were prospectors, 49ers perhaps, figures lifted from sepia-toned photographs and plunged into harsh, technicolor reality. His own appearance, the brightly colored synthetic jacket, the complex architecture of his backpack, the sleek black rectangle of the phone currently tucked away, would mark him instantly as an anomaly, an impossibility. Dangerous in a time and place where strangeness often met with suspicion, superstition, or violence. He spent the next few hours circling wide around the mining claim, following the creek downstream, relying on the assumption that water eventually led to some form of settlement. The terrain remained stubbornly unfamiliar, resisting correlation with the downloaded topographic data on his phone. The LLMs, he knew, held vast historical data sets, but accessing them now felt premature, risky. First, observation. Information gathering, the old-fashioned way. Late afternoon brought the scent of wood smoke and the faint sounds of human activity, growing louder. He approached cautiously, using tree cover, until he reached the edge of a clearing. Forest Hill. It wasn't a town in the 2025 sense. It was a raw, sprawling wound carved into the wilderness. Muddy tracks served as streets, lined with rough-hewn timber buildings, saloons with swinging doors, a general store with faded lettering, assay offices, blacksmiths hammering sparks into the twilight, and countless tents and lean-tos clinging to the slopes. The air was thick with the smells of mud, sweat, cheap whiskey, frying bacon, and the ever-present tang of disturbed earth. Men, overwhelmingly men, moved with a purpose that was either feverish, the glint of gold lust in their eyes, or exhausted, the slump of unrewarded toil. Their clothes were practical, worn, heavy wool, canvas, leather boots caked in red mud, hard faces, wary eyes. Alex felt a profound sense of dislocation, more acute even than waking up lost. This wasn't just the wrong place, it was the wrong reality stream. He retreated deeper into the woods as full dark approached, finding a secluded spot to make a cold camp. No fire. Unpacking felt like performing an autopsy on his old life. The lightweight tent, the inflatable sleeping pad, the titanium spork. Artifacts from a future they couldn't conceive of. He needed to blend in. Quickly. He sorted his gear. Much of it had to go. The brightly colored pack and clothes were unusable. He buried them carefully, along with most of his modern food packets, keeping only the densest calorie bars for emergencies. What could he salvage? His multi-tool was potentially useful, its pliers, knife, and screwdrivers universal enough. His first aid kit, invaluable, but its sterile packaging and modern components needed careful concealment. His boots might pass, though they were clearly advanced. His water filter was a godsend, but had to be used secretly. The core assets remained. The iPhone 16 Pro, now showing 68% battery, the solar panel, and his wits, amplified by the silent silicon oracles residing within the private LLM app. The next morning, he emerged from the woods clad in his most subdued base layers, drab merino wool, carrying only a small nondescript stuff sack containing the phone, charger, first aid essentials, multi-tool, and remaining bars. He needed local currency, local clothes, and a plausible reason for existing. He approached the edge of town again, watching, listening. He needed an inn. He saw a livery stable, men hauling hay and mucking out stalls. Basic labor. Honest. A starting point. Before approaching, he ducked behind a large oak, pulled out the phone. The Gorilla Glass screen felt impossibly smooth, alien. He opened the private LLM app, shielding the screen's glow. He typed rapidly, fingers clumsy with cold and adrenaline. Generate plausible backstory. Lone traveler, arrived Forest Hill, California, approximately 1852, seeking work. Need common slang, social etiquette basics, typical daily wages for unskilled labor, common dangers to avoid. He selected Llama 3.2, known for its nuanced historical context. The response flowed onto the screen almost instantly, a dense block of text. He scanned quickly. Arrived overland, maybe separated from party, seeking fortune like everyone else, common greetings, avoid direct eye contact with rougher types, distrust of foreigners, especially non-whites, wages pitiful, maybe $1 a day plus keep for stable work, dangers, claim jumpers, cholera, drunken brawls, bad whiskey. He absorbed what he could, pocketed the phone, took a deep breath, and walked towards the livery. The stable master, a burly man with suspicious eyes and tobacco-stained teeth, looked him up and down. Alex, recalling the LLM's advice, kept his gaze slightly averted, respectful. "Looking for work, mister," he said, pitching his voice lower, trying to roughen the edges of his 21st century diction. "Hard worker, can muck stalls, handle horses." He gestured vaguely east. "Came overland. Lost my gear, looking to earn enough for a new stake." The stable master spat. "Everyone's looking. Works hard, pays crap." He paused. "No horses?" Some, Alex admitted truthfully. He'd ridden as a kid. Fine. $1 a day, grub, bunk in the loft. Steal from me, I'll see you hang. And just like that, Alex Thompson, PCT hiker from 2025, became Alex Thompson, stable hand, in 1852. The work was brutal, back-breaking, mucking stalls, hauling water, repairing tack with crude tools. The grub was often salt pork and hardtack. The bunk was straw infested with things that bit. He learned through observation. The social hierarchy, the casual racism, the constant undercurrent of desperation and violence beneath the surface optimism of the gold rush. He kept his head down, spoke little, listened intently. His merino wool clothes drew a few odd glances for their fineness, but he mumbled something about inheriting them. The biggest challenge was power. The iPhone was his lifeline, his only advantage, but it was useless dead. Each sunny afternoon, he'd find an excuse to slip away, checking fences, gathering kindling, find a secluded sun-drenched spot, unfold the solar panel, and plug in the phone, anxiously watching the battery percentage creep upwards. It was a constant, nerve-wracking exercise in secrecy. Discovery meant questions he couldn't answer. One evening, nursing aching muscles in the hayloft, he pulled out the phone again. The private LLM app glowed softly. He queried Gemma 2, known for its efficiency. Analyze common causes of inefficiency and illness in 1850s gold mining camps based on typical practices. Suggest one minor, easily implementable improvement using only locally available materials, knowledge, presentable as common sense. Gemma responded swiftly. Major issues: poor sanitation. Water contamination leads to dysentery, cholera. Inefficient water use in sluicing. Loss of fine gold. Poorly maintained tools. Breakage, injury. Suggestion: advocate for designated latrine pits, downhill, downstream from water sources and living areas. Frame as preventing bad air or miasma, concepts understood in the period. A few days later, watching miners haul water from the same creek others used for washing and waste disposal, Alex saw his chance. He struck up a conversation with a couple of the less rough-looking men during a break. Noticed folks seemed sickly now and again, he commented casually, echoing language he'd overheard. Back where I came from, he lied, gesturing vaguely. Found it helped to keep the necessaries well away from the drinking water. Stops the air getting foul, seems like. He didn't mention germs or bacteria. He used their framework. Bad air. One man grunted, another spat, but a third, older man with weary eyes, nodded slowly. Ain't wrong. Place stinks enough already. It was a tiny seed, planted with knowledge centuries ahead of its time, translated by silicon, delivered with calculated casualness. Whether it would take root remained to be seen, but it was the first deliberate manipulation of his new reality. The first prompt executed not just on the phone, but on the world itself. The seed of sanitation, subtly planted, bore slow fruit. Alex noticed a few miners grudgingly digging rough latrines further from the creek. Cholera didn't vanish overnight. The concept of boiling water was still alien, but perhaps a few lives were less miserable. A few bouts of dysentery averted. It was a minuscule victory, achieved through careful application of knowledge, mediated by the glowing screen he consulted in secret corners of the hayloft, shielding its light like a forbidden text. The stable work provided cover, sustenance, and invaluable ethnographic data, but it was a dead end. Alex Thompson wasn't destined to muck stalls for eternity. He possessed, locked within the iPhone 16 Pro, the distilled knowledge of a future civilization. It was time to leverage it more assertively. His opportunity came through observation, amplified by AI analysis. He watched the endless cycle of digging, hauling, and washing gravel. He saw the frustration in the miners' faces as fine gold dust inevitably washed away with the tailings from their crude sluice boxes. He saw tools break, handles snap, metal fatigue costing precious time and effort. One evening, huddled in the loft, the phone plugged into the solar panel draped carefully over the edge of the hay door to catch the last rays of sun, he opened the private LLM app. This time, he directed his query to Quen 2.5, the model strong in technical specifics and planning. Analyze standard 1850s gold sluice box design, rocker, long tom. Identify key points of fine gold loss. Propose 2 to 3 simple modifications using available materials, wood, canvas, basic metal, to improve fine gold recovery rate. Provide simple diagrams, instructions suitable for a semi-skilled carpenter. The response was detailed. Diagrams showing adjusted riffle angles, the addition of canvas linings in specific sections to trap microscopic flex, suggestions for better water flow control using simple wooden gates. It wasn't revolutionary tech from 2025. It was optimizing 1850s tech using principles of fluid dynamics and particle physics translated into practical steps. Alex spent hours studying the output, using Llama to cross-reference historical tool availability and Gemma to simplify the language further, ensuring he could explain it without resorting to futuristic jargon. He needed capital, however small. He'd saved nearly every cent of his meager wages. He approached Silas Croft, the weary older miner who'd seemed receptive to his sanitation suggestion. Silas had a small claim, barely productive, his hope fading visibly each day. Alex found him listlessly panning at the creek's edge. "Silas," Alex began carefully, "I've been watching the boxes. Seems like a lot of the real fine stuff might be washing through." Silas just grunted. "Everyone knows that, son. Angel dust. Can't catch it." "Maybe," Alex countered. "Maybe we can catch more of it. I worked timber mills back east." Another lie, woven into his fabricated past. "Learned a bit about water flow, how it settles things. Got an idea for adjusting the riffles, maybe adding some cloth lining. Nothing fancy. Might improve the take." He sketched the LLM-derived designs in the dirt with a stick, simplifying Quen's diagrams. "Tell you what, let me work with you. I'll help you modify your sluice. My time, my know-how. If it increases your take significantly over a week, you give me a small percentage. If not, you lose nothing but a bit of wood." Silas was skeptical, but had little to lose. They spent 2 days modifying his sluice box based on Alex's sketches, Alex guiding the process, carefully explaining the why in simple mechanical terms, slowing the water just so, giving the little specks a place to catch. The other miners watched with amusement or scorn, but when Silas ran his first batch of gravel through the modified sluice, the cleanup revealed significantly more fine gold dust trapped in the new canvas liners and behind the adjusted riffles than he'd ever recovered before. Not nuggets, but a heavy yellow smear that represented real value. Silas stared, then grinned, a cracked leather smile that transformed his face. Word spread like wildfire through the camp. Alex wasn't just the quiet stable hand anymore. He was the fellow who knew things. Miners started approaching him, offering percentages for his advice, for help modifying their own equipment. He used Quen within the private LLM app to calculate fair percentages, Llama to understand negotiation tactics suitable for the rough-and-tumble environment. He quit the stables, focusing entirely on his burgeoning consultancy. He still needed his phone more than ever. Charging it became a more complex operation, finding private moments during the day, sometimes paying a trusted contact. Silas became his first ally, to stand guard, while the panels soaked up photons. His next step involved addressing the tool problem. He observed the blacksmith, a capable man limited by the quality of his materials and traditional techniques. Alex, consulting Gemma for materials science basics and Llama for historical metallurgy context, formulated another plan. He couldn't introduce steel alloys, but he could suggest improvements in heat treatment and tempering based on LLM analysis of 1850s capabilities. He approached the blacksmith, not with arrogance, but with collaborative curiosity. "Ever notice how the pickaxes chip right at the edge?" he might ask, then subtly introduce a concept derived from the LLM about differential tempering, keeping the core slightly softer while hardening the edge more effectively. He used the private LLM app to generate simple procedural steps the blacksmith could understand and test. The result: tools that held their edge longer, resisted shattering. The blacksmith, initially wary, became another ally, his productivity and Alex's commission soaring. Alex was accumulating capital now, real gold dust and nuggets stored securely. He needed to move beyond consulting. He used the private LLM app again, tasking Quen with analyzing the camp's supply chain bottlenecks and Llama with assessing local resource availability, timber, water rights, potential agricultural land. The synthesis pointed to a clear opportunity: a reliable, well-managed supply store, and potentially leveraging his growing reputation, assay services. Miners were often cheated by unscrupulous buyers in Sacramento. Reliable local assaying, based on sound LLM-provided chemical principles Alex could implement with basic equipment, would be invaluable. He partnered with Silas and the blacksmith, pooling capital and expertise. They secured a prime location, built a solid timber structure, designed with slightly better structural integrity thanks to Gemma's engineering prompts. Alex managed the logistics, using Quen to calculate inventory needs and optimize supply runs to Sacramento, minimizing costs and maximizing profit. He established the assay office within the store, performing meticulous, though secretly AI-guided, assessments of miners' finds, quickly gaining a reputation for honesty and accuracy. He became Thompson, a man of substance, his origins increasingly irrelevant next to his demonstrable competence. The iPhone, his silent partner, remained his most guarded secret. The glowing screen consulted late at night, its silicon heart pulsing with the knowledge that was steadily transforming not just his fortune, but the very fabric of Forest Hill itself. He was no longer just surviving. He was building. The assay office and supply store, Thompson and Croft Reliable Merchants, became the commercial anchor of Forest Hill. Its reputation for fair dealing and quality goods, underpinned by Alex's uncanny knack for anticipating needs, thanks to Quen's predictive modeling based on camp population, mining yields, and seasonal changes, solidified his position. Wealth flowed, not just in gold dust, but in influence. He was no longer merely adapting. He was beginning to shape his environment with increasing deliberation. The LLMs within the private LLM app weren't just tools for personal gain anymore. They became instruments for systemic change. Alex looked beyond the immediate scramble for gold. He saw the environmental degradation: hillsides stripped bare, creeks choked with silt. He saw the social ills: rampant alcoholism, preventable diseases, the lack of structure beyond rough frontier justice. His 21st century sensibilities, amplified by the vast knowledge base accessible via Llama, recoiled. He couldn't introduce environmental regulations. The mindset didn't exist. But he could promote efficiency that coincidentally reduced waste. He began investing his growing capital, guided by LLM analysis. Querying Llama on sustainable 19th century practices and Gemma on relevant engineering principles, he identified key leverage points. Sanitation remained critical. He quietly funded the digging of deeper, better-sited communal latrines and rudimentary drainage ditches, framing it purely as civic improvement and disease prevention, miasma control. Clean water was next. Using LLM-derived geological insights, he identified a more reliable spring source higher up the slope, less likely to be contaminated. He financed the construction of a simple wooden aqueduct, again, designed with slightly optimized flow dynamics suggested by Gemma, bringing cleaner water closer to the main settlement. He didn't preach germ theory. He offered convenience and demonstrably clearer water. Usage followed. Agriculture was another frontier. The miners relied almost entirely on expensive imported supplies. Alex used Llama to research suitable crops for the climate and soil, and Gemma for principles of crop rotation and basic irrigation adapted for the Sierra foothills. He purchased tracts of less desirable mining land downstream, hired workers, offering better wages and conditions than most mining operations, and began experimenting. He introduced contour plowing to reduce erosion, framed as keeping the good soil, simple check dams for water management, making the creek work smarter, and crop rotation, resting the soil to keep it strong. The initial yields were modest, but proved the concept. Local food production was possible, reducing reliance on costly supply lines. His influence inevitably attracted opposition. Jedediah Stark, a brutish saloon owner and moneylender who thrived on the miners' desperation and controlled several key mining claims through intimidation, saw Alex as a threat. Alex's promotion of temperance, subtly suggesting watered-down whiskey in his own dealings, based on LLM health data about alcohol's impact on productivity, and his fair assaying practices cut into Stark's predatory ecosystem. Furthermore, Alex's growing network of allies, Silas, the blacksmith, miners grateful for fair prices or effective tools, newcomers attracted by the marginally more civilized atmosphere Alex fostered, represented a shift in the camp's power dynamics. Stark began with rumors. Alex was too clever, unnatural, perhaps in league with shadowy forces, a projection of Stark's own methods. Accidents started happening near Alex's operations. A suspicious fire damaged a section of the aqueduct. Tools went missing from his agricultural project. Alex knew direct confrontation was foolish. He turned to the private LLM app, consulting Llama on historical power struggles and Quen on risk analysis and counter strategies within the context of 1850s frontier justice, or lack thereof. The consensus: build alliances, solidify economic indispensability, avoid direct provocation, but be prepared for escalation. Alex strengthened his position. He formalized agreements, using Quen to help draft simple contracts that offered mutual benefit and security to his partners and employees. He established a rudimentary lending system through his store, offering fairer rates than Stark, further eroding the saloon owner's grip. He funded a basic schoolhouse, hiring a teacher and subtly guiding the curriculum via LLM pedagogical suggestions towards practical skills, literacy, arithmetic, basic geology, agriculture, creating a generation with slightly better prospects than mere shovel work. The tension culminated one night when Stark and several heavily armed thugs cornered Alex outside his store. It wasn't a robbery. It was an intimidation play, likely prelude to an accident. "Thompson," Stark growled, his breath thick with whiskey. "Getting too big for your britches. This camp don't need fancy ideas. It needs men who dig." Alex, outwardly calm but inwardly accessing Llama's negotiation tactics and threat assessment protocols, didn't back down, but neither did he escalate. "Stark," he replied evenly, "my business helps miners keep more of what they dig. Clean water keeps them digging longer. Learning helps their children do more than just dig. There's room enough for all of us, if we build smartly." Before Stark could retort, Silas Croft and the blacksmith emerged from the shadows, armed with shotguns, followed by a half-dozen grim-faced miners who owed Alex their loyalty or livelihood. Stark, facing a united front, hesitated. His power relied on isolating his victims. This was different. He spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Thompson." He and his men backed away into the night. It was a temporary victory, hard won through calculated social engineering and the quiet power of foresight. Alex knew Stark wouldn't give up, but the balance had shifted. He wasn't just a merchant anymore. He was a nascent civic leader. He redoubled his efforts, subtly introducing more whispers of the future. He guided the blacksmith towards experimenting with bellows designs based on LLM aerodynamic principles, improving forge efficiency. He discussed basic principles of steam power derived from Gemma's physics modules with a curious mechanic who tinkered with water pumps, framing it as harnessing the creek's power more effectively. He introduced the concept of standardized, interchangeable parts for sluice boxes and tools, using Quen to generate simple specification sheets. Each innovation was small, incremental, grounded in the possible, yet cumulatively transformative. Forest Hill was still a rough gold camp, but under Alex's quiet guidance, filtered through the silicon brain in his pocket, it was becoming something more. An incubator for a subtly altered future. The architect was laying foundations only he could fully comprehend. Years bled into decades. Alex Thompson, the stranger who walked out of the woods, became a fixture, then a pillar, then a legend in Forest Hill, and his influence spread outwards across the burgeoning state of California. The gold rush fever eventually cooled, but the foundations Alex had laid, sustainable agriculture, rational infrastructure, fairer commerce, an emphasis on practical education, allowed the community to transition and thrive where many other boomtowns withered into ghost towns. He never held formal office, preferring to operate through influence, investment, and the quiet dissemination of carefully selected knowledge. His secret remained intact, though the burden of it settled deep into his bones. The iPhone 16 Pro, meticulously maintained, its battery health carefully managed through judicious charging cycles via increasingly sophisticated, though still fundamentally 19th century, solar gathering setups he devised with trusted artisans, was now an aging artifact. The private LLM app still functioned flawlessly. The local models, Llama, Gemma, Quen, his silent, constant advisors. But the device itself was finite. Its casing was worn, the screen perhaps less responsive. The solar panels grew less efficient. he knew his unique advantage had a lifespan. The loneliness of his position was profound. He formed friendships, mentored promising individuals, even experienced fleeting romances. But the core truth of his origin remained an unshareable chasm. How could he explain consulting a pocket-sized glass rectangle that held the accumulated knowledge of a world yet unborn? He watched his contemporaries age, grapple with the challenges of their time using only the tools of their time, while he possessed insights that felt like cheating, like wielding a divine artifact. There were moments of intense temptation to introduce antibiotics, electricity grids, internal combustion engines, leaps that could reshape the world overnight. But the LLMs themselves, particularly Llama, when queried on the socio-historical impact of abrupt technological introductions, consistently cautioned restraint. Chaos, societal collapse, unforeseen consequences. The risks were astronomical. Frank Herbert's warnings about prescience and the traps of predetermined futures echoed in Llama's synthesized prose. Progress had to be organic, seeded, not imposed. He focused on building robust, resilient systems and empowering people. He invested heavily in education, establishing not just schools, but libraries stocked with carefully curated books, sometimes subtly enhancing texts with footnotes or appendices derived from LLM knowledge, and technical institutes focused on improved trades, agriculture, and basic engineering. He promoted cooperative ventures, fairer banking practices, using Quen to model stable financial systems, and infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, irrigation networks, always designed with slightly superior engineering principles gleaned from Gemma, ensuring longevity and efficiency. He guided research into improved metallurgy and materials science, leading local industry away from brute force towards more refined techniques. He never published scientific papers. He simply asked the right questions, funded the right experiments, and connected the right people. Jedediah Stark remained a thorn, representing the old ways of exploitation. But his influence waned as Alex's network of educated, prosperous, and loyal citizens grew. Their final conflict wasn't one of violence, but of economics and politics, ending with Stark's financial ruin and retreat into obscurity, a victory for systemic change over brute force. As Alex entered his later years, a respected, almost mythic figure known for his wisdom and foresight, he began the final phase, securing the legacy. He identified individuals not just of intelligence, but of ethical character, mentoring them, instilling the principles of rational inquiry, long-term planning, and social responsibility that he, guided by his secret oracle, championed. He commissioned intricate mechanical calculation engines based on Babbage-esque principles optimized by Quen, capable of handling complex logistics and planning for the growing state. He endowed research foundations with carefully worded charters, nudging inquiry towards areas the LLMs identified as critical paths for sustainable development: materials, science, energy efficiency, within the context of steam and water power, public health, information management. He meticulously documented key knowledge, not in plain text, but often encoded within architectural plans, agricultural almanacs, or complex mechanical designs, using methods suggested by Llama for long-term information preservation in a pre-digital age. Perhaps only another intelligence, centuries later, could fully decipher the embedded layers of advanced understanding. The phone, its battery finally failing beyond the ability of the aging solar panels to reliably revive, was given a ritualistic farewell. Alex, alone in the Sierra foothills near where he'd first arrived, powered it down one last time. The screen went dark, taking with it the direct link to his impossible past. He buried it deep, encased in pitch and lead, a time capsule containing the seed of another timeline. He felt not loss, but completion. The crutch was gone. The structures it had helped build now had to stand on their own. Epilogue. Glimpse. Jump forward. 1950s. California is recognizable, yet different. Cities are cleaner, planned with more foresight regarding resources and environment. Technology has advanced, perhaps reaching early 20th century levels slightly faster, but with curious divergences, a greater emphasis on durable goods, efficient public transit, sustainable agriculture integrated into urban landscapes. Global conflicts seem less frequent, diplomacy more rooted in rational resource management, echoes of systems Alex subtly promoted. Historians puzzle over the California acceleration, attributing it to a unique blend of gold rush dynamism and the unusually forward-thinking civic planning and educational foundations laid by figures like the semi-legendary Alex Thompson, the prospector of progress, whose origins remained shrouded in mystery, but whose legacy was written across the face of a world subtly, yet profoundly, altered for the better. The altered tapestry held. The prompt had been executed.